Well, good morning, everyone. Welcome to this week's webinar. Qdabra tries to do this every week, and I want to thank everyone for joining us today and making this one of our more popular webinars recently. My name is Patrick, and I'm usually one of the presenters here, but today I'm very happy that Jennifer Lindsay is going to be sharing some of the her knowledge with Microsoft Flow, which we've been using recently. And she's going to be doing demos. And next week we also have Hillary Stupa, who's going to be doing a deeper dive. And also want to just let people know that Jennifer is a bit sick today, and so because of the turnout for the webinar, she's agreed to do this. So if she hears if she doesn't sound like her normal self, you know, she is a professional opera singer on the side, then just keep that in mind. But we're going to try to get this done today. And I've got two quick polls. Jennifer, you there?
Good morning.
Good morning. I'm going to do these two quick polls for folks just to get an idea of where you're at with Flow. Flow is Microsoft's new, sorry for the misspelling, Flow is Microsoft's new workflow slash if this then that, you know, web-based. I mean, flows are everywhere, right? If you're reading strategic news, flows, it's all about processing lots of information quickly these days, whether you're the you know, the big telescope down in Chile that's trying to get, you know, is it 600 million pixels per second, or if you're just doing DNA analysis at home, you know, you're still doing a lot of flows, and we need to have some kind of a logic engine to do that. Microsoft Flow is out there. It's looking really good. So we're going to do a quick question here for you. How much experience do you have? About 53% of you are saying Zippo, 31% dabbled a bit, and 15% are a couple of simple samples. Great to see that. We'll close the poll and move on to one more quick poll and then a quick ad, and then we'll get on with the demo. So the second question, what are you using for forms these days? You know, obviously InfoPath is still Microsoft's supported solution for SharePoint, but there are lots of apps out there like Nintex, K2, Ardivia, PDF ShareForms, Clasys, you name it. There's tons of stuff out there. We also have an app called Qdabra Forms here, and we're very happy to have some adoption on that recently. And anyway, just a quick question there for you. Looks like a lot of you are using InfoPath still, and maybe that's where you came to the webinar. We got 10% of you using Forms here. That's great. And then 12% saying need to figure this out. So Jen, if you could switch to the next slide, we'll do a quick obligatory advertisement, and then Jen will start working on her demos and presentation for Flow. So Jen, can you share out the next screen?
It should be shared out right now. Can you see it?
Not yet. Oh, there we go. Okay. So yeah, so for those of you who don't know, we do have an app for you to ensure your forms future, so to speak. It's got better performance than InfoPath Form Services, but best of all, it doesn't require any change from you. You don't have to change your forms. You can leave them in the library. It can work side by side. There's missing features that we've added for mobile and many more. I won't go into a lot of details, but if you have questions on this, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. I know that several of you already have, and I see a lot of familiar names and some new people. Welcome to our webinar. So with that, Jen, I'd like to stop talking and let you get on with your webinar.
All right, thanks a lot, Patrick. So let's go ahead and get started with a quick overview of Microsoft Flow. Microsoft Flow is a rather new tool. It's only been around for about a year, maybe a year and a half, possibly less than that. And it's originally built on top of Logic Apps, which was Microsoft's platform for integrating various cloud-based services. And because it's cloud-based, it's cloud-focused, this is only available for Office 365, which is the SharePoint Online cloud-based version. Flow allows you to design workflows completely from scratch with various steps that they allow you to integrate, or they actually provide a ton of pre-existing templates that you can customize. And the workflow design, because it's cloud-based, it's done entirely in your browser. There's no need to download any additional software. So for those of you who perhaps have used SharePoint Designer in the past, nothing like that is needed. It has a great layout. It's basically laid out like a flowchart, which makes it very easy to understand which actions and which steps come before and after which ones, and it's a great visual representation of the workflows. In my opinion, much better than what SharePoint Designer does. You can trigger a workflow by an event, or you can set it up as a recurrence, which is something that previously in SharePoint was extremely difficult to do and often required third-party plugins. So now in Microsoft Flow, that is a basic step available to everyone. You can also build complex if-else conditions using the logic apps syntax. And this is not entirely necessary to set up basic flows, but if you ever want to have a complex condition where you have some nested ors and ands and all sorts of different sort of conditions, similar to what you can do with a condition inside InfoPath, where you can have all sorts of ors and ands combined, using logic's app syntax, you can go beyond the built-in interface. And I'll show you an example of that. You can also share your workflows so that other people on your team can edit them. When you create a workflow by default, it's visible only to you, even though it's available to run on whatever SharePoint list or library you associate it with. But you can also share it with other people on your team so they can make edits. And another great feature of Flow that I love is that it has built-in workflow history logging. So you can see exactly when the workflow has run and whether or not it was successful, and furthermore, which steps were successful, which steps failed, which steps didn't run, perhaps because they were part of a branching condition that wasn't satisfied. And there's also some nice error messaging that will tell you what failed for a particular step that failed. And one last comment. This is not just for SharePoint. I'm going to focus exclusively on flows for SharePoint in this introductory demo today, but it can also be used with a lot of other Microsoft tools like PowerApps, Azure, Outlook, OneDrive, and even other things like Salesforce if you get a premium Flow account, and Dropbox, and there are literally a million other ones out there. But like I said, we're only going to focus on SharePoint today. So just a quick overview of getting started. It's very, very easy. You simply go to flow.microsoft.com and you log in with your SharePoint credentials. And then at the top you would select My Flows from the menu bar. And then you'll see that there's the option to either create a flow from scratch, create from blank, or create it from a pre-existing template. And there are literally thousands of pre-existing templates. And some of them are very similar to some of the out-of-the-box workflows that SharePoint provides, like sending an approval email when a new item is added. And examining these existing templates is a great way to learn Flow by example, if you're one of those learn by example types like I am. However, for today, you have me as your tour guide, so I'm going to be walking you through creating 2 flows from scratch. Now, just a little bit about the basic structure of a flow. At the beginning of if you're creating a new flow, you have to select either a trigger or a recurrence. So you have to actually pick what event will kick off the workflow, whether it's adding a new item to a library or updating an existing item, or when a file is deleted. You need to select some sort of trigger at the beginning. And this is different from the way you would design workflows in SharePoint Designer, where you could just design the workflow and then later on choose through a different menu when you wanted it to run. Or you could set it up as a recurrence when just basically say how often should the workflow run. So you do have to pick one path or the other when you're setting up a new flow. Then from that point on, you can simply combine actions and conditions in order to execute all of the different steps that the workflow needs to execute. And there are tons and tons of actions. Some of the most popular ones are sending an email, editing a list, creating a file. And with a condition, of course, you can condition based on the status of various fields, the status of various promoted properties in a library, or the status of various columns in a list. You can also combine conditions and actions. You can run multiple actions in parallel, which is great, so that if one action happens to fail, the other actions don't have to depend on the success or failure of that particular one. You can nest actions inside conditions, you can nest conditions inside conditions, and you can reference various promoted properties or list columns and the values of those promoted properties and list columns from inside the workflow as well, so you can have various actions and conditions take advantage of those values. Okay, so I'm going to go through some demos now because this is really best taught by example. We're going to do everything based off a very simple task list that I just created. And we're going to go through building a simple trigger workflow. We're going to send an email when a new task is created. And then I'm going to build a simple recurrence workflow which will email all of the owners of incomplete past due tasks. So this is very simple stuff, things that you run into normally in a business situation. And along the way, I'm also going to show you a little bit about how to build a complex condition with a logic app syntax. Don't worry if that part goes over your head. It's just something to throw in there for the power users amongst you. And I'll also show you a little bit about what when you're debugging a workflow, about what some of those error messages look like. All right, let's get started. Okay, so I have logged into Microsoft Flow already. I'm going to go up and select my flows. And you'll see that I already have a couple of flows set up just in case the ones that I'm about to build for you don't work for some reason. I've got my backup ones to show you. And there is a really neat flow that's one of the templates that basically subscribes you to get updates from the flow blog. So I subscribed myself to that one. That was kind of a nice thing. If you do create one from a template, it will take you to a page with, I really wasn't kidding when I said like thousands. This is just like the first page of them, but there are tons and tons and tons of templates. I highly encourage you to browse the ones associated with SharePoint or any other services that you'd like to use. But we are going to create one from scratch. So I'm going to select Create from Blank. And here at the top, I get to select, I can filter by which services I want to use. And so since I'm dealing with SharePoint, I am going to select SharePoint to filter. And now here are the various triggers that I can use for SharePoint. So I'm going to select when a new item is created because I only want to email the task owner when a new task is added to my list. Another good one to use is when an existing item is modified. And I should mention that these two, when they talk about items, Flow is geared towards lists, but it works for libraries. So don't let that faze you. So when a new form is created, when an existing form is modified, same thing. One thing to know that is actually not documented is the when an existing item is modified trigger actually works for new items too. So if you were wondering how to get a workflow to run when a new item is created and when an existing item is modified, use the existing item one because it also works for the new items. You just find that out through trial and error. It's not really documented anywhere. But we only want this to run for new items, so I'm going to select when a new item is created. All right, so now I need to tell Flow which site I want to use so it can retrieve the value. So I'm going to go over here to my site, and here you can see the simple task list that I've set up with a bunch of tasks that I really do need to do this week. And I'm going to enter the site. And I did it wrong. I need to actually select Enter Custom Value because it doesn't know what site I want to use, and enter the site. And then down below here, I should be able to select the list name, and you'll see there is my task list right here. Now, another note, if this were an InfoPath form library, it would not appear in this list. For some reason, Flow only pulls the lists from the SharePoint site that you give it the address for. But never fear, all you would do is select Enter Custom Value and paste the name of your SharePoint library if you wanted to connect to a library instead of a list, and it would work just fine. All right, so I'm connected to the task list now, and the next thing I need to do is create my email step. So I've configured my trigger step, and now I'm going to configure my action. So again, I'm given the option to just select all services, and because I have Office 365 Outlook configured for my account, I'm going to select that as my service to filter the actions, and here we'll see that there is an Office 365 Outlook send an email action. I'm going to select that. And now I get to select the various fields, and the nice thing about this is it pulls in all of the columns in my tasks list. And it just so happens that one of those columns is the email address of the person that has been assigned the task. So I'm going to select that and make that my to field. And I'm just going to select some sort of subject. Let's see, new task assigned. And you can add in any of these fields that I'm entering right now. You can add any of these columns that are available in the list. And in the body, you can actually get kind of fancy, and I'm going to do that here. You can actually add HTML tags in the body of the email if you wanted to format it. So in this one, I'm going to type a new task has been assigned to you, and I'm just going to do, just to make it nice formatting, don't worry if you don't know what these tags mean, this is going to create a nice bulleted list. I'm going to add the task title. I'm going to add the status, and I'm going to add the due date. And a word to the wise, if you do want to put HTML tags in the body of your email, you will have to open up the advanced options and select yes for HTML. Otherwise, it will print exactly what you see right here, tags and all. I've done that a couple of times. You also have the ability to customize the from. However, if you do this, you'll have to prove that you have the credentials from the from address. If you leave this blank, it's simply going to use the email address that you have logged in, that you've created this workflow underneath. So that's another thing to keep in mind. If you're going to have a lot of automated emails sent out for a system, you want to make sure you create those flows underneath the account associated with the email address that you want to send those flows out. Otherwise, they're all going to come from Jennifer Lindsay, and Jennifer Lindsay is going to get a lot of replies. And so I just named it. I made sure that I like to name it with the name of the list first, because when you see all of your flows in a row, they can all get kind of confusing. So I'm going to create this flow. And if there's an error in the flow, it will actually show an error message up here. If it doesn't, then you know that there are no syntactical errors in the way that you set things up. So I'm going to click Done. And let's go ahead and test this workflow. Let me turn off my old one so I don't get double emails. All right, let's go ahead and test this by adding a new task. And here we go. And not started, and I'll give myself a due date in the future. All right. So I've added that new task, and if I go here and I click on the eye with the circle, this will actually show me that the workflow ran 14 seconds ago. It only took 2 seconds. And if I click on this for more info, it will show me which steps were successful, which steps failed. So a little green check mark in the top right corner means that step was successful. So I see that both steps were successful. And if I go over to my email account, there we go. Here is the email that was sent out by that workflow. And it has the title of the task, the status, and the due date. So that's how to do a very, very simple trigger workflow. Now let's take things to the next level. And we are going to create a recurrence workflow from scratch. So I'm going to go back to create from blank. And this time for my service, I'm going to select schedule. And there's only one type of trigger for a recurrence. And here you can select the frequency and the interval. So, for example, if you wanted something to run every 7 days, bam. However, for troubleshooting purposes, it's easier if we run things every 5 minutes. And you can actually not run things more frequently than 5 minutes with the free version of Flow. Just letting that out there. For debugging purposes, 5-minute intervals is perfectly fine, I've found. There are a couple of advanced options for time zone, start time. If you leave these blank, it'll assume the start time is whenever you create the flow, and the time zone is whatever time zone your Office 365 site is set up for. So I'm going to skip those. Okay, so we want every 5 minutes. Let's review what we want to do with this particular workflow. We want to send an email to every task owner with an incomplete task that is past due. So the first thing we need to do is get all of the items in the task list. So I'm going to choose an action. I'm going to filter by SharePoint service. And I'm going to use the Get Items action. This will get all of the items in my list. And again, I'm going to have to tell it what site I'm dealing with. So let me copy. Oops. Let me copy that site. I'm going to have to enter it as a custom value. And then let me select the task list. And under advanced options, I just want to mention you can use OData to filter your queries, similar to what you would do with a REST query in InfoPath, if any of you have done that. You can use OData to filter. I won't go into that today, but just pointing that out for those of you. That'll be very useful if you have a list that has several hundred or maybe even over 1,000 entries. You don't want to retrieve or get all of those list items, but we're fine here. We only have a couple items in our list. So this step will get all of the items in the list, and now we only want to send the email for certain items, so we're going to add a condition. And this condition is going to be a little bit complex. That's okay. We want to get everything where the due date is earlier than today, because that means it's past due. So we would love to say due date is less than today. However, you'll notice in this drop-down, there's no less than. So we're going to have to switch over to advanced mode. Oops, I closed the condition. Let me open it back up. We're going to have to switch over to advanced mode. And when you click advanced mode, you will see this long, incomprehensible string. Don't worry. I'm going to build the string for you in Notepad. If you don't understand it, that's okay. You can still do a lot with basic mode and conditions. So I'm going to ignore most of this because I already know the syntax from my use of Flow. What I want is the raw name of the field, that due date field. I'm going to switch back to basic mode. And I'm going to go to Notepad where I already have my formulas set up. So you will just have to trust me on that this formula compares the due date and sees whether or not it is less than now. Just trust me on that. And the other formula I already have prepared. This is to see whether or not the status is not completed. So if I combine these two together, this will give me a condition that will find all the items in the list that are not completed and are past due. So I'm going to take this long, complicated statement, and I'm going to go to advanced mode, and I'm just going to paste over this. There we go. And unfortunately, it's very hard to see the entire condition. This box does not expand. It's another flow limitation. I'm sure they'll get to it eventually. Okay, so we've set up our condition to filter the items that were returned from get item above. Now we have to finally take an action. So for all of the items that meet that condition, under yes, we're going to add an action. And that action, again, is going to be an email. So I'm going to go to my Office 365 Outlook, send an email. And the email is going to go to the same person, the person who is the owner of the task. And we'll give it a title like incomplete task past due. And in the body of the email, we'll put something like and I'll use the same thing that I did last time. We'll add a little bit of HTML to format it, make it look pretty. Again, don't worry if you don't understand what these tags mean. You don't need to do this. Just adds a little bit of polish to the email. And due date, we want to make sure we put the due date in there as well. And then under advanced options, I'm going to make sure to select HTML because I have entered HTML tags in the body. And another fun optional property of this email action is importance. So this is a past due email. I'm going to select high importance because that seems like the sort of thing that would be highly important. Okay, so we have now set up our recurrence. And I'm going to name this email past due owners, and I'm going to click create flow. Okay, now this is one great thing about Flow. It's letting me know that the template, basically the workflow template I just created, has failed. So there is an error somewhere in there. And it tells me exactly where the error is. It's in this very, very long statement that I created. And I actually did this deliberately so that I could show you that you get these nice error messages even when you're creating them, not just when you're running them. And just trust me on this. It's these extra ampersands that I left in. So if I delete them, this will now save correctly. All right, my flow has been created. So now this flow is running. And the recurrence ones, here we go. Last month, so here it is. This is the email past due owners 13 seconds ago. And if I click this, it actually already ran. And then it won't run again for another 5 minutes because that was the interval I selected. And let's see if it ran successfully. And you'll see that it did run successfully. All the steps show green check marks by them. So that means I should have some emails in here. And here are the emails that were sent. And you can see that these are, that condition did select all of the tasks that aren't completed. And the due date is in the past. That's 5/16. And this other one, also the status is not completed. And the due date is also in the past. So that condition is working correctly. And I will keep getting these every 5 minutes because, like I said, that's the interval that was selected. So let's take a look real quickly. I want to show you what it looks like when you run a flow and you actually have an error. So I'm going to add a new task, but I'm going to leave the email field blank. Now normally you would want to make the email field required because you wouldn't want a blank field because then the email is not going to go to anyone. But we'll see what happens when we do this. I'm going to leave that blank, and I'll just select any due date. Okay, so I'm going to select Save. So I've now added a new task with a blank email field, and that should create a problem for this new task added workflow that we created earlier. Okay, and you'll see the status is failed. So I'm going to go ahead and click on that and see what failed. All right, so I see that the when a new item is created step ran successfully, but the send an email step failed. So if I click this to open it up, it tells me that there was a bad request. And if I scroll down, it will show me the actual raw output of the email that was sent. And if you look in the body, here it tells you, message, parameter 2 cannot be null or empty. And if I look up, sure enough, the to field was blank. So that tells me exactly what went wrong. So this is what I mean when I say the debugging is vastly superior to the debugging that you would get with another tool like SharePoint Designer. All right, that completes the demo portion.
Mm-hmm. And Jen, we have a nice question.
All right, yes, I see that we have tons of questions. Sorry about that. I get in the flow of things, pun intended.
And in fact, this answer to one of the questions.
Okay, I'm going to go through and delete all the audio lost ones. I'm very sorry about that. Okay. Okay, so we've got a couple of questions about, okay. And, okay, Patrick did a good job of answering the question about Microsoft Flow offering forms that Jason Barnett had. Shane asks, can Flow distinguish at field level within InfoPath? Meaning, can it look at the value of a certain XML form? No, so it cannot see inside the InfoPath form. It can only see whatever values you have promoted into columns in the InfoPath library. So yeah, Patrick was right about that, only working with promoted values. Okay, how do we know what the real name of a field is? That's a great question, Susie, and really you only know that by going into that advanced mode. Another way to do it sometimes is if you go to the library, oh, it's not going to do this for me. And if you go into settings, why am I not getting into settings? I'm not finding the, oops, I'm not finding these settings. Okay, I'm sorry, I'm not finding the list settings menu. That should be here. Do we not, do we not have list settings configured on the site?
Oh, it's new UI, or your method used in a condition may give you the actual name. Try to use the simple condition and it would show you the real name.
Yeah, that's the other way to do it, is going into the, let me get one of these opened up again. If you go into an actual condition, yeah, and whenever you go into, here, let me just add another fake condition down here. Whatever value you choose, if you just go into advanced mode, it will give you the actual name of that field. That's the easiest way to get it. Okay, what is add dynamic content in the email form? Add dynamic content, Paul, is, let me go back to basic mode. So whenever you see add dynamic content, that means access any of the columns that are in the list or any of the promoted properties in the InfoPath form library. So you can access any of those properties for whatever current item the workflow is running on. That's what dynamic content means. And it's dynamic because, of course, the values for those columns will be different for each item in the list or each form in the library. All right, Michael asks, any recommendations where we can learn the syntax of the advanced conditioning? Yes, that's actually on the last slide of my presentation here. And you will be able to get these slides as well if you download the webinar package that will be sent out later today. It's based on the Logic Apps workflow definition language, which is rather dense. However, you can also get some help from the Microsoft Flow community forums as well. So using these two together, you can basically put together pretty much any condition that you would need. All right, how does Flow interact with SQL Server? Edward, that's a great question, and I believe that will be covered in next week's webinar that Hillary will do. She's done work connecting Microsoft Flow to Azure, and so you'll be able to see some answers to that. But yes, you can, since it's cloud-based, you can interact with SQL in Azure. Suzanne asks, can you easily copy a workflow or create a template? Yes, you can save your flows and share it as a template. So there are actually two ways. Oh, that's right, I don't want to update this one because I just created that fake condition. So if you want to just share a workflow that you've created with other people that you work with, you can go, that's right, I didn't actually show you that, so thank you for asking this question. Let me just pop this back in. You can actually go to your main My Flows page, and if you click on the little people icon here, you can add another owner, and all of these people, any names or email addresses or user groups that you add here will get access to that workflow. So that's a way you can share it internally. And I do believe you can also, I need to look into doing this because I've never publicly shared a workflow or a template that I've created, but I do believe that there is a way to do that as well. I'll see if I can find out some more information about that. Okay. There we go. Okay, yeah, it's on the gear. Okay, how do I maintain a connection to a SQL table with the SharePoint list ID? That SQL, like I said, connections to SQL and Azure will be covered in next week's webinar. I'm not sure how to do that off the top of my head because I haven't used this with SQL. So sorry about that, Susie. And can we use Flow to calculate running totals of values in a field in a SharePoint list? So Flow does not have the equivalent of workflow variables that can be saved in the middle of it. So anything that you calculate will need to be any intermediate values that you want to save past the duration of the workflow will need to be saved to something, so written to a list somewhere or updated in a database somewhere. So, but yeah, you can use Flow if you want to do that. You can go through an entire list of things and calculate a running total and then save it somewhere else. All right, it looks like that is all of the questions. I think I've got everybody. So thank you very much for sticking with me throughout this entire webinar. I know we've gone a little bit over, but hopefully I've helped to demystify Flow for you. And like I said, you'll be getting the webinar package later today. And I've got some links on the last slide, as well as information on the premium Flow versus the free version that comes with Office 365 365, as well as which version of free comes with which Office 365 package.
Hey, Jen, this is Patrick back again. I have a few questions here that I couldn't answer. Do you have the question box available to you?
Yes, I just went through all of those, I believe. Which ones were you looking at?
Well, I just got back. I was in another meeting. Sorry. Thanks. I just want to check on that. That's great.
Okay, yeah, we ran through all of the questions in the question list.
Cool. Way to go. Thank you for doing that today.
Sure, no problem. All right, thanks a lot, everybody. And stay tuned for next week's webinar, which will definitely cover database connections to Flow, given all of the questions that you had concerning that. All right, take care.